Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2014 Public Defenders Justice Summit. And thank you so much for being here. It's really incredible to see you all here gathered today to talk about some of the most important and pressing issues of our time. It's hard to believe this is the 11th year since we've been doing this annual Justice Summit. And we do it to bring people together to talk about solutions for San Francisco and beyond. And every year we've created an ambitious agenda as to how we can reform the criminal justice system. And what's great in San Francisco, and I've been a public defender and doing this work for 30 years, this is the first time that I've seen the police department, probation department, district attorney's office, sheriff's department, and juvenile probation all on the same page in terms of working to improve outcomes for individuals who are in the system and preventing young people from getting involved in the system to begin with. Now, that's not to say that we have a lot of work to do. It's been particularly challenging given realignment and everything that we're seeing and experiencing and the lack of resources. But San Francisco is well poised because of the groundwork that we've laid and also all of the work that you have done. We have over 80 organizations represented here. Many of you work with people who are either in or formerly incarcerated. And I can't express enough, how important it is that we all come together and work together to reform the criminal justice system. We have a great program for you today. We have 3 panels. The first panel is on recovered memories, which is a fascinating subject. You may have heard about the Woody Allen case and the whole question of whether or not memories are retained, and the whole science, the neuroscience of human memory. So we're going to be talking about that today. We also have a panel on children of incarcerated parents. In this country, on any given day, there are 3 million children who has either a parent or both parents in jail or prison. We incarcerate 25% of the world's prison population here in the United States. We are addicted to mass incarceration. And so we're going to examine the impact that has had on our most vulnerable, that is our children. Our third panel is going to talk about the scourge of plea bargaining, that plea bargaining has become justice or injustice for most people who have some interaction with the criminal justice system. It's estimated that over 98% of criminal cases are resolved by plea bargaining. We have a right to a jury trial under the Sixth Amendment. That is a right that shall remain inviolate according to our laws. However, every day people are coerced into taking pleas. We sit amongst our clients who are among the very poor. And because the bail system is based solely on money and how much money you have, you could be charged with murder, and if you have enough money to put bail, you're out of jail. On the other hand, you could be charged with a minor crime, and if you don't have $1,000 or $500 or $200 to post for bail, you are in jail. And it creates an unfair and coercive system where poor people who are in jail because they can't afford to post bail are essentially forced to plead guilty. Also, the sentencing schemes nowadays are so extreme that a person who is facing, say, life in prison is almost certain to plea bargain his or her case because of fear that if he or she goes to trial, they're going to receive something worse. And it's also a dirty secret within the criminal justice system that defendants are often punished for going to trial. That if you go to trial, it's known that you may receive 2 to 3 times the sentence. So these are, again, critical issues, cutting-edge issues, which I think, unfortunately, define many of the injustices that occur today. We also have Gloria Killian, who's here, one of my heroes, and you'll hear her story and how she fought many, many years, not only for herself, but many others, and ultimately prevailed. And her life story, I think, is such a tremendous lesson for all of us. Before we start the program, I just wanted to report to you a few of the initiatives that are working on at the Public Defender's Office. It's really been a banner year for our office. I wanted to first say that we've continued to work collaboratively with all of the other criminal justice agencies through the Reentry Council, which we have here in San Francisco. It's an official body of agencies and community leaders united to improve outcomes for individuals who are recently released from prison. And in most counties, when the governor announced the realignment initiative, which essentially placed low-level felony offenders, people who were in state prison, but placed them into the supervision of local government and local agencies, in most counties you've seen jail populations explode, in some cases double. I'm proud to say, because we've worked together to create alternatives to sentencing and not putting people in jail or prison, that we've actually reduced our prison population. We've worked with the Sheriff's Department, with all of the other agencies to find alternative sentencing alternatives for people rather than having people in jail or prison. And in San Francisco, our jail population is less than half of what it was 3 to 4 years ago. Now, we still have a lot of work to do, but again, it says a lot about the way in which San Francisco has dealt with the realignment initiative. I'm very proud of our LEAP program. LEAP stands for Legal Education Advocacy Program. This is a program that we started 3 years ago, and we have a full-time educational attorney and a social worker who works with young people who are in the juvenile justice system. And what we found, looking back, is over 50% of the young people that wind up in the juvenile justice system would get there because of incidents that occurred at school. And what would happen is that they would often be expelled or suspended, not go back to school, and many of those kids were the same kids that would matriculate into the adult criminal system. And so by providing an educational advocate, we are able to represent young people in educational proceedings. And working together with the San Francisco Unified School District, we've been able to keep kids in school, improve outcomes, and reduce recidivism or rearrest. There have been over 300 young people that have gone through our program, 300 kids, and 92% of them have not reoffended and have stayed in school. And that's real progress. And this is a program that, as far as I know, has not been done anywhere else. This year, we celebrate the 15th year of our Clean Slate program. This is a huge issue when we're talking about collateral consequences. What happens to individuals once they've been convicted of a felony or even a misdemeanor? In addition to serious immigration consequences, you also have employment consequences, you have housing consequences, and often are excluded from even getting things like student loans. And so our Clean Slate program has worked to expunge records of individuals, and so we are now expunging over 2,000 records a year. But there's a lot more advocacy that needs to be done. All of Us or None did a tremendous job of banning the box, that is, advocating for the removal of the question on employment applications as to whether or not you've been convicted of a crime until you've had an opportunity to compete for the position. But there's a lot more work that needs to be done in that arena. I'm also very excited that our office in San Francisco was chosen as a site by the Department of Justice to implement a new project. When we talk about how failures occur and how people are wrongfully convicted, it just doesn't happen out of thin air. It is a result of judgments that people make, it is a result of poor policies, and it's a result of lack of accountability. And so part of what we're looking at is how can we avoid that in terms of the criminal justice system. And so we are developing a series of checklists that will be implemented in our office, in the Alameda County Public Defender's Office, and ultimately throughout the nation to ensure that we reduce the risk of errors in our work. And we're going to be advocating for the use of checklists throughout the criminal justice system, because unless you have that level of accountability, you are always going to have innocent people or the risk of innocent people being convicted. You know, in the Bay Area alone, we've had over 25 cases of individuals who have been exonerated, just in the past 10 years. Those individuals collectively have served over 230 years in prison for crimes that they did not commit. And so by implementing this checklist process, we are going to be able to ultimately improve outcomes for our office and for the entire country. I also want to offer my thanks to my staff, 92 attorneys and 80 support staff at the Public Defender's Office, as well as all of the other agencies. I'm very proud that we won several awards last year. We won the Lawyers Committee Award for Access to Justice, and also the Davis Vanguard Watch Court Watch Award. The Court Watch program is an excellent one, and I think David Greenwald is here. And it's a program in Davis, California, where they actually send law students and volunteer attorneys into court to monitor court proceedings. And they have a blog and they report on what's going on. And so anytime there's an injustice, they bring it to the attention of the community, an excellent way to encourage accountability. So again, we have a great program for you today. We'll have questions at the end of every session, and we'll have someone here with a microphone so you can hail them down and ask a question. Or I think what we might do is also have cards that you can fill out, since that will probably be faster. So I will now introduce a very special person. When the public defender is not able to handle a case of a person who is unable to afford an attorney, there is a private attorney who is appointed from what we call a conflicts panel. And a conflicts because there's a conflict of interest in law. That panel is administered by the Bar Association of San Francisco. And the Bar Association of San Francisco is our co-sponsor in this event. Stephanie Skaff is the president of the Bar Association of San Francisco. She is a partner who practices in patent and intellectual property law at the law firm of Farrell, LeBron, and Martel. And she's been a great partner with the Public Defender's Office and the Conflicts Panel. Stephanie, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I want to thank Jeff for once again putting together a Justice Summit program today that is not only interesting, but which addresses some really critical issues that affect the accused and the right access to justice in our courts. So as Jeff said, my name is Stephanie Skaff. I'm the president of the Bar Association of San Francisco and also the president of the board of directors of our nonprofit entity, the Justice and Diversity Center. Our mission is to advance equality and civil rights, to support diversity in the profession, to support excellence in the profession, and the portion of the mission that is closest to my heart is to work to provide quality legal services for the poorest and most vulnerable members of our community. And we do that in several ways. On the civil side, we have a lawyer referral and information service. It's the largest of its kind in the country. We provide lawyer referrals to over 50,000 individuals every year. They call a number. We have a panel of experienced attorneys that we help match them with to make sure that they receive the support for their legal problems that they need. And what happens if the people who call cannot afford a lawyer? That's where our nonprofit, Justice and Diversity Center, comes in. We provide pro bono attorneys and legal staff to help provide support for the most pressing legal needs of the poorest in our community. Last year, I'm proud to say that with the support of the City of San Francisco, we launched the first ever Right to Civil Counsel project, which seeks to assure that every person, regardless of means, receives legal representation, not only in criminal cases, but also in civil cases that affect their basic human needs, things like housing, child custody, safety, and health. These areas intersect with our criminal justice system, and Jeff can tell you this at every angle. It is important that we provide this full service legal representation to the people of San Francisco. But today, however, I want to focus on the criminal justice system because that's what we're here today to focus on. As Jeff mentioned, the Bar Association has been a long-time partner with the Public Defender's Office and with the courts to help provide private attorneys to represent defendants who otherwise cannot receive representation from the Public Defender's Office. We have a panel of almost 100 qualified private criminal lawyers that provide this service, and every year we provide about a third of the representation for criminal defendants here in San Francisco. We've been doing this for 50 years, and we're very proud of this work. As Jeff will tell you, the criminal justice system here in San Francisco is different than almost every of the 57 counties in the rest of this state. Under Jeff's leadership, we have a public defender's office that is well-led, well-respected, well-staffed, and well-funded. And when individual accused cannot receive representation from the public defender, they are provided with a qualified lawyer through the Bar Association. We also work in many ways with our volunteers to help support the people who are involved in the criminal justice system, particularly the youth. And I want to highlight one program that's coming up in May, part of my initiative this year called It Starts With a Day. We are doing a day at the Log Cabin Ranch where volunteers from the Bar Association will pair up with adjudicated youth who are there at the Log Cabin Ranch School to plant a garden together. This may be one of the only occasions that many of these youth have seen a lawyer outside of a courtroom. It's a real opportunity for them to see lawyers as real people and to envision a life that's different than the one that they know right now. So I look forward to that and invite you all to come be a volunteer if you can. But today is really not about celebrating the work that we've already done. It's about reminding ourselves of the work that is yet to be done. We come together every year because we realize that justice and access to justice has continued to be an elusive concept in our country, and that there are many barriers that prevent the accused and the courts from providing full access to justice for everyone. So I challenge you today to stand with the 8,000 members of the Bar Association to continue to be committed to addressing these barriers to access to justice for criminal defendants and for all of those who face challenges to their basic human rights. I challenge you to help in supporting our court system and to raise your voice to make sure that our court system is adequately funded so that the constitutional rights can be protected. And I challenge you to support those attorneys, both at the Public Defender's Office and those private attorneys who provide the important services and legal representation that assures that the rights of individuals are protected. So, welcome again. Thank you, Jeff, again. I look forward to a great day and terrific programming.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I also want to acknowledge Julie Tron and Betsy Walken, who run the conflicts panel for the court. I'm very excited about all of the organizations who are represented here. And just to give you a sense of the breadth that all of you represent in terms of your experience and the good work that you do. This is just a slide showing the 80 organizations that are here. And we talk about collaboration and communication and working together. The only way that we're going to move this issue forward is not going to be an act of Congress, not going to be the legislature, but it's going to be us. And just us means just us, because we have to take responsibility, whether or not you're working in the criminal justice system, outside the criminal justice system, whether you're in jail or in prison. And being a part of this movement means not only getting the policy wonks or the agency heads together, but listening and working alongside with people who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. And that's why in all the efforts that we've been involved in, we include the voices, perspectives, and participation of individuals who were formerly incarcerated. On our reentry council, we have designated seats for individuals who were recently released from prison, because they are the ones who know and understand, as well as the voices of victims and other perspectives within the system. So thank you so much for being here, and we hope that you'll also take the opportunity over lunch hour to get to know each other and to talk to each other and to reach out. I wanted just to take a moment and acknowledge the passing of Reuben Hurricane Carter. He passed away on April 20th, just 3 days ago. And he was a middleweight champion boxer when he was arrested by the police and charged with a double murder in 1966. And he proclaimed his innocence. He was tried and convicted. And he served 20 years in prison before he was exonerated. There was no forensic testing that was done in his case. There were witnesses who testified against him, whose deals with the government were kept from the defense. And it was really a classic case of everything that could go wrong. And when he got out of prison, he led an organization called the Association in Defense of the Wrongfully Convicted from 1993 until 2005, and he continued his work. And 2 weeks before he died, he wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times calling for the exoneration of one of the individuals who he had fought for their release, and so hopefully that will happen soon. But I just want to take a moment of silence in memory of Reuben Hurricane Carter. Thank you. I wanted to acknowledge the sponsor of the event. This is the law firm of Kazan, McLean, Satterley, Greenwood, and they've been very generous and are supporting not only this event, but also the lunch today. And so I'd like to thank them with a round of applause for their support. And now it's time for our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker, Gloria Killian, was the victim of a shocking injustice. In 1985, Gloria was a law student. She was a law student, attending classes, a bright career ahead of her as a lawyer. She had no criminal history, and yet she was arrested for the murder of an elderly couple, for masterminding their murder, and was sentenced to 32 years in prison. 32 years in prison. After 17 years in prison, her conviction was overturned. Her friend, Joyce Ride, who's the mother of the astronaut, Sally Ride, stood by her side and advocated on her behalf. That effort took almost 17 years, but finally, Gloria was released. Today, she's an attorney and the executive director of the Action Committee for Women in Prison. She also has been featured in the series Death Row Stories on CNN. If you haven't seen it, make sure that you do. And she's written a book titled Full Circle, a true story of murder, lies, and vindication. And we'll have the book available during the break. But she is somebody who has not only fought for justice for herself, but while she was in prison, helped so many other women who were wrongfully imprisoned or who had been convicted simply for defending themselves against a batterer. And so not only is she someone who represents, symbolizes, and epitomizes the fight for justice, but she's someone who's done it, who's been there, who's had to pay with her own life, with the number of years that she served in prison for no good reason. But the miracle of it all is that she's out today fighting for others. So it's with great love and respect that I welcome Gloria to the stage for her keynote remarks.
I really am shrinking by the minute. Okay. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here. And I want to follow Jeff's lead because we lost another exoneree a week ago. And he wasn't famous like Reuben Carter. His name was Greg Wilhoit. And when he was released, he did a lot of work. He and I were released about the same time. And we used to go out with an attorney named Steve Rohde and do what we could to end the death penalty. I don't know the medical reasons why either Jeff or Reuben died, but I can tell you the real reason they died, because of their wrongful conviction and imprisonment, because it destroys your life. It happens to me. It happened to me also, and if you're lucky, you can pick up the pieces. Thank you. And you just do the best that you can to go on. I'm also really honored to be in the same room with Jeff Adachi, who has been a hero of mine for years. As a matter of fact, we were co-counsel for years, unbeknownst to Mr. Adachi, by the way. He did have better offices. His were in San Francisco, mine were in prison. But this was at the beginning when battered women who defended themselves in any way went to prison and they got life sentences. And that was the end of the whole discussion, for the simple reason that the evidence code did not allow them to put on any testimony whatsoever of the battering or abuse that they had endured. And so, of course, everybody got a life sentence. My case is a little bit different. It began in 1981, and it's taken 32 years of my life. And yes, I'm old enough for it to be twice that. But in 1981, there was a home invasion robbery in Sacramento, California. And the couple were both shot. Mr. Davies died from his wounds, Mrs. Davies did not. Mr. Davies was a heavy investor and collector of coins and gold, silver bars, things like that, things I'd never even heard of. And he did most of his business with Allied Coins. Allied Coins was owned by two people, Charlie Duncan and Virgil Fletcher. I worked for Virgil Fletcher, but I worked as a process server. They were terminating their business, and it was very, very acrimonious. And so, whoever got stuck with the bad debts, et cetera. So I went looking for people. I did a lot of research at the DMV. Prior to 1981, you could actually go find out about people, and that's exactly what I did. I don't believe that I had been in the shop more than once. I certainly did not know Mr. Davies or anything about him. Anyhow, following the robbery, the police rightly focused on coins and coin shop dealers and coin shop customers. And so they came and they questioned Virgil Fletcher. And then the next day they came for me. Only that isn't quite how they put it. They took me downtown and they questioned me and they said, well, you know what your rights are and all that kind of stuff. Are you willing to waive your rights? And I thought, well, sure. This was a long time ago, and it was back at the time when we all believed that you could trust government officials and you could trust the police, the government. Thank you very much. I'm sort of crippled in that particular way. Sorry. Anyhow, it's very emotional for me today. For one thing, just being in the same room with Jeff Adachi, and it's not a prison cell. That's pretty impressive to me. And because of Ruben and because of Jeff and because of all the men and women who have died in prison, wrongfully convicted, some were rightfully convicted, but they were way over-sentenced. And there's no excuse for it. And the real solution to it is, as Jeff said, it's up to us to change the system. But to get back to what happened to me, I went downtown, I talked to the police for, I believe it was 3.5 hours. And the whole interrogation, they immediately started, we know you did it, blah, blah, blah. You have to tell us all about it. It was your typical really ugly, nasty police interrogation. They do everything they can do to intimidate you. Excuse me. And so all of a sudden they stood up and they said, you're under arrest for the murder of Ed Davies, which I found extremely surprising because they certainly hadn't said anything incriminating, and I didn't know Ed Davies. I had heard about it, I saw it on the news, just like everybody else. And so they said they were arresting me. I said, fine, I'm invoking my right to counsel. I will speak to you no further. They continued to question me, and they asked me to take a polygraph test. And again, I said, I have nothing to say to you, and I've invoked my constitutional rights. It's something you may have heard of vaguely, but it says that I don't have to talk to you anymore, and I'm not gonna. So they marched me off to jail. And the loveliest man, I have no idea who he was, but he was from the public defender's office. And they threw me into a tank. One of the people in there was a cop, by the way, it was a plant. But this man races up to the tank and says, who's Gloria Killian? And so I went to the front bars, and he said, I'm from the public defender's office. We can't defend you because we have a conflict, but I just want to tell you one thing. Don't say a word to anybody because it's a setup. And I thought that was so kind of him. Like I said, I have no idea who it was. But it was a lovely gesture. And I was a little short on lovely gesture in those days. So anyhow, they hauled me off to jail, and they told me that I was facing death, that I not only was never going to get out, but that I was going to be executed. And for some reason, the electric chair immediately flashed across my mind. And I don't know why, we don't even use it in California, but that's what I thought. But I did what any intelligent person would do. I hired the best lawyer in California. Well, with all due respect to everybody in the audience. But the fact is, I hired a really great lawyer. And after 4.5 months, the case was thrown out because there was no evidence against me. And some of the things that I'm going to tell you, I found out later on, but they add to the continuity of how it really went down. And so I hired a really great lawyer, and I was out in 4.5 months. And so it was over. But it wasn't over, because there were 2 perpetrators, and they were easily captured. One was Stephen DeSantis, and one was Gary Massey. nobody said a word about me, nobody mentioned my name. They seemed, it's almost like they lost interest in me. And so I tromped around on bail for 3.5 years. Stephen DeSantis went to trial first. Gary Massey, who was his cousin, by the way, as well as his co-defendant, got up on the stage and said, well, I didn't even take a gun. Like, what did he plan to do, yell at them? I have no idea. But he blamed it all on his cousin, said his cousin was the shooter and his cousin was sentenced to death. Then Gary Massey went to trial. Again, same story. My name never came up, except when the judge asked Stephen DeSantis, or I'm sorry, the district attorney asked Stephen DeSantis about me, and he said, I've never heard of her, I don't even know who you're talking about. And so I was released. But they came back a year later. Same people, same scenario, I was at work, and here we went again. They asked me if I would talk to them, and I declined the opportunity. And it was the same thing. They took me back to court, they charged me the same charges, and they charged me with the death penalty, knowing that the only proof that they had against me was something that they had helped to contrive. And that is one of the things, well, there's many things wrong with the death penalty. No one has the right to take a human life. And that's what you're allegedly being punished for. So they're killing us to show that killing is wrong, which I find slightly illogical, to say the least. So I was back in prison for 8.5 months. But the problem was I had run out of money. I had already spent all the money I had. So I was appointed an attorney from the alternate panel. And I had never heard of him, but I had heard of his father, who was a very, very well-known criminal attorney in Sacramento. And I thought, well, maybe this won't be too bad. The only thing that I can tell you for sure is that legal talent and ability is not hereditary. He was just good enough to get me convicted. In his defense, I do have to say that there was so much going on behind the scenes that we never knew. But I still believe if I had gone to trial with my first attorney, I would not have been convicted. The trial went kind of the way you would expect it to go. I stood there gaping most of the time. Virgil Fletcher got on the stand and said, well, he didn't know, but then he didn't directly accuse me, but he was very good. He was very subtle, and said that perhaps, that I had mentioned Mr. Davies or something. The flaw in that line of thinking is how on earth would I have known to ask him a question about Mr. Davies, because I'd never heard of the man. And I never had anything to do with the customers in the shop. But when Ed Davies was dying, one of the things he said was, Virgil Fletcher set me up. And that information was also suppressed. So I go to trial with this guy. And Gary Massey gets up and tells this story. And it's so vague. He's so well coached. Basically what he said was, I'm a drug addict. I was loaded on drugs. I didn't even take a gun. I really don't know what happened. I don't know why Stephen did that. But she's the one who planned it all. And I had all these meetings with her. And they all happened in a parking lot of a place called Zodi's, which I found out years later is a department store. I'd never even heard of it. And he just spun this whole thing. But the main reason or a major part of the reason that I was convicted was because the district attorney and his constantly vouching for the witness, which of course is forbidden, but the judge let him get away with it. Mr. Davies' death was a huge scandal in California, and there was a real push to get somebody, just get somebody, get anybody. Well, guess who it got to be? It got to be me. And as the trial proceeded, I thought, this is insane. This can't be happening. And one of the things that I truly believed was what they taught me in law school, was that the justice system worked. Ask me that same question today, and you will undoubtedly get a very different answer. However, I noticed, and this is an aside, but it just came to mind, so I'll throw it in. I noticed on the website where it says, Justice, are we there yet? And the answer, obviously, is that we are not. But in some places, we're getting there because people are beginning to understand what happens and what goes on, and how this kind of thing can happen. Everyone knows the causes for wrongful conviction: false identification, misidentification, people, co-defendants trying to make a deal, false confessions. And there are many simple ways that that could be stopped or changed. But to get back to my trial, I just kind of sat there mostly with my mouth hanging open, staring. I was really in a state of shock because I honestly believed what they taught us in law school, that the truth will always come out. So mentally, I ranged from, oh my God, I'm going to die, they're going to kill me, I don't know what I'm going to do, to, they can't convict me, come on, I didn't do anything, the system is going to work. Well, it worked okay, just not quite the way I expected. Fortunately for me, after I'd been in custody for about 8.5 months, this California Supreme Court issued a decision called People versus Carlos. And in that case, the court ruled that you could not be charged with the death penalty unless you had planned the murder, committed the murder, been there. You had to have some knowledge, prior knowledge of the murder, or you could not be charged with death. My lawyer had me in court the next day, and I was granted a $25,000 bail because I was, I'd been arrested in the same place, and the judge listed several reasons, and everything was fine. The DA had me back in court the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even get to sleep in, for heaven's sakes. And he wanted the bail raised to at least $500,000. Fortunately, the judge, there's very simple rules, and the judge said, what? Did you pull her off an international flight? Did you catch her trying to buy a passport? What? In other words, he really raked the district attorney over the coals. And then he said, she's staying out on a $25,000 bail. If she actually does something, let me know, and then we can have another hearing. But this is ridiculous, and this is harassment. And I just love that judge, by the way. And so he released me, and they paid very little attention to me until my trial. And as I said, it was so vague. But the big problem was everybody believed what the district attorney had to say. And I mostly just sat there with my mouth hanging open because I couldn't figure out what was happening to me. A lot of it just didn't make any sense. And my lawyers should, of course, have gotten the dailies from Stephen DeSantis. There was much that could have been done, but it wasn't done. So I was convicted. And when I was convicted, the DA stood up and said, because I was who I was and I was going to law school and blah, 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 that of course I should get more time than anybody. And I did. The one perpetrator was on death row. The deal that had never occurred, which they said had never happened, and both the district attorney and the witness said there had not been a deal. Well, there was a deal. And years later, it was found. It was buried in the file of another case in another courtroom by another person. And so off I went to prison. And I think that's worth stopping for a second, just thinking about that. Just think about what it would be like to be sent to prison if you knew nothing about the case, knew nothing about the people, and all of a sudden you're in the state penitentiary and you're doing life. And it's a very scary proposition. And so I began to learn the highways and the byways of the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, as Arnold Schwarzenegger would say. I just can't seem to find the rehabilitation. But, I'm looking. It's the least I can do. In prison, they have something called classification, where they decide where you would work. It's held in the mailroom. And I think there should be a sign about only the damned enter here, but that's another story as well. And so they looked at my records, and they said, oh, so you're claiming that you went to law school. They laughed at me, they made fun of me, they called me a liar, and then they assigned me to the law library. And that, in a nutshell, is the California Department of Corrections. So I got the job, and I kept the job for 15.5 years. In fact, when I went out to court on my evidentiary hearing, they were the ones. They actually held the job open for me. I ended up doing work for the department itself, setting up many different things. But the thing that shocked me when I got there was that the women, they weren't fighting for themselves. there wasn't anything I could do for myself. I couldn't even figure it out. I hadn't the vaguest idea what had happened. But I could do something for them, and I did. There was a girl named Ducky, and Ducky was a sweet little thing. She just wasn't all that bright. But anyhow, she was always getting into silly things, stupid kinds of trouble, and she would get a 115, which is a disciplinary action. And she would go in and plead guilty and get punished. And in prison, when you are punished for doing wrong, as according to their lights, they add time onto your sentence. And so on a 16-month sentence, well, she'd already been there for 2 years, so she was having a few problems. But my roommate, who worked for all of the captains and everybody who heard her, they actually pulled her aside and said, "You've got to go to the library and see Gloria." If I was smart, I'd have business cards made up, but I couldn't figure out how to do that yet. That came later. And so she showed me her 115, and as soon as I stopped laughing at how badly it was written and how ridiculous it was, I told her what to do, and she went to the hearing, and she won. And she was just absolutely amazed. And she was called into the office of Lieutenant Tutt. And Lieutenant Tutt said, "What's going on with you?" And she said, "I'm not going to plead guilty because Gloria said I don't have to. So there." And that was the beginning of my acquaintance with Lieutenant Tutt. And despite my general feelings about the Department of Corrections and the money pit that it really is, there are some very decent correctional officers, and I want to acknowledge that. When my mother died, some of them were very, very kind to me. And so I bumbled around for about 10 years. But I did a lot of writing because as Jeff's co-counsel, I knew these women's cases. And so I wrote newspaper articles. I had articles published in the Daily Journal, Ms. Magazine, various law reviews, all of the newspapers and everything else, because a lot of them were not articulate because they couldn't talk about it. It was just too painful. And I know that I really shocked him because the first woman who told me her story, I believe I actually said, "Wow, I'd have killed him years ago. What took you so long?" But they began to realize that it was okay to fight, and they're still fighting. And with the help of many, many people, the laws about battered women were changed. And a great deal of that help came from San Francisco and from Jeff Adachi and all of the other people that were involved. In the meantime, a woman came to do her thesis, and while she was there, some of the women, she would ask them a question, they'd say, "I don't know, you'd have to ask Gloria." And that is how I met Elizabeth Leonard, who did her PhD thesis on battered women and their incarceration, and who only planned to do her thesis and then go on to working with children, but she never left, and she never left us. And so gradually things changed. A lot of the people who worked on it were from USC. And when some of the girls told me that there was no law project for women, I thought, well, we'll just see about that. And between my nagging and between Professor Chuck Weisselberg making the mistake of accepting a collect call, that's the first thing I can tell you. Don't accept collect calls from prisons and jails, okay? He agreed to look for funding, and they created the CIW Law Project, which I'm proud to say is still functioning and has gotten many women out of prison, especially women going before the board. And so it went on, and it went on, and it went on. And sometimes you're okay. Sometimes some of my days I had a lot of fun, especially when I was able to beat a court case, and I didn't even get to go to court. She just did what I told her. I wrote her lawyer a note, and she took care of it. But most of the time, being in prison is just hell, because it is about the destruction of your spirit and your dignity and your self-respect. And we could change it all if we put half of the money into rehabilitation that we put into incarceration. We could stop a lot of it right now. I'm fascinated. I can't wait to hear the panel about juvenile offenders, because that is where you get them. And if you don't get them when they're young and they start going to juvenile hall or someplace else, they're basically doomed. I mean, it would be kinder to take them out and shoot them in the head, because their life it's a straight road to hell. After about 10 years, I received a letter from a woman named Joyce Ride, who had a friend that she knew from the county that she had often visited. And the woman said, well, if you're ever going to go to prison, because Joyce comes from the era where women, they stayed home, they raised their children, and they did good works, so to speak. And she was a friend of Sybil Brand, who built that jail, and then spent the rest of her life trying to get her name off it because she was so humiliated by what went on there, and some of the others, and they created Friends Outside, et cetera. And she was going to a conference, she needed some writing. I'd just published several articles in the USC Law Review. And so she hired a lawyer, she hired an investigator, and it only took them another 5 years in order for them to fight my way out, despite all the proof that they had. And there was my writ was 1,000 and some pages long. And even after I was released, they continued to harass me. They've followed me to Congress. They have followed me during newspaper interviews. They'd never miss an opportunity to get my name in there by saying that I'm not exonerated, I'm guilty. But the funny thing is, they don't recharge me. They won't retry me. And as the final statement in the CNN program, which I will also make my final statement, the judge said, you know, you guys need to grow a spine. You should either retry her or just shut up and move on. And this time I think it really is the end. So thank you.
I'd like to present a certificate of commendation to you, for your courage, your bravery, and, for sharing your story with so many. And I know that you'll continue to move mountains. So thank you. Thank you very much.
That's so lovely.
And I'd also like to present you with our Gideon medal. This is named after Clarence Earl Gideon, who wrote a handwritten petition from prison to the United States Supreme Court, and he was responsible for the creation of public defense for so many. And your efforts while you were in, and the work that you will continue to do, I know will make a difference to so many. So thank you very much.
And thank you.